This is an absolutely fantastic arcade football game. Soccer Superstars by Konami is a lot of fun to play. Games go by really quickly. And it's easy to score goals and generate all sorts of highlights. And yet it's hard to find any information about this game. Well guys, I'll be blunt. I didn't even know that this game existed until somebody told me about it a few days ago. I don't remember ever seeing it in the United States arcades, much less back in the mid-1990s when it came out, even though I know that this game came out not too long after the 1994 World Cup. In fact, a lot about this game still is a mystery to me. Well, we do know that this game was released in December 1994, since that's exactly what the game tells us. And it's not hard to tell what hardware this game ran on just by looking at it. This over-the-shoulder perspective will be familiar to you if you know a lot about Konami's mid-1990s arcade games. Specifically, the 1993 basketball game Run and Gun uses a graphics engine that looks a lot like Soccer Superstars. Run and Gun is different, of course, since it's a basketball game. But the similarities in gameplay are obvious. Though it's a bit more obscure, the 1997 American football game Rushing Heroes, also by Konami, also used the very same hardware. If you're interested in the technical details, this was the Konami GX board, used in 17 different games in the mid-1990s, and this is what the board looked like. Now, if you're like me, you're probably wondering why in the world Konami put out so many sports games in such a short time frame. I don't know exactly why, but I think I have an idea. But we've got to go back and look at the history first. So back in 1989, Konami released Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles in the arcades. Though I don't think many people knew it at the time, this marked the beginning of the second golden age of arcade gaming. In fact, I remember this game being popular in the mid-1990s. This is long after people had stopped caring about the Ninja Turtles. 1991 saw Turtles in Time, a game that you probably know better from its Super Nintendo release.
Prepare to die!
That year also saw The Simpsons, one of the most famous arcade games of its time. This game was notorious back then for not having any sort of home console release. It's also a lot of fun to play even now. Konami then came out with X-Men in 1992 to complete its collection of dominant arcade games. But the problem is that there was a lot of competition, and that competition came quickly and fiercely. Advances in technology made it easier to make arcade games with incredible graphics, and companies like Capcom and Midway took advantage. Street Fighter II came out in February 1991 and quickly revolutionized the arcade world. This was a sprite game just like those earlier Konami games. But the gameplay was incredibly satisfying. I remember seeing long lines of kids waiting to play this game, a phenomenon you just don't see anymore these days. That prompted Midway to come out with the notorious Mortal Kombat in 1992. Now this game was extremely controversial for obvious reasons. Now Konami did try to compete with games like this one, Martial Champion. Martial Champion came out in 1993 and looks a lot like Street Fighter II. However, it was largely a failure. If you read through video game magazines from 1992 and 1993, you'll think that kids wanted nothing but fighting games. In fact, there were articles everywhere, at least in the United States, decrying video game violence and commenting on the decline of morals among young people. The truth, though, is that kids just wanted to play games that were fun and well designed. This was obvious in April 1993 when NBA Jam came out. The arcade version of NBA Jam was nothing short of revolutionary. It was also one of the most popular video games of all time, netting revenues in the billions of dollars. It's still one of my favorite games to this day. My understanding is that it was NBA Jam that prompted Konami to jump deep into the world of arcade sports video games, but I'm not sure that the company really understood what made NBA Jam so great. Run and Gun is a good basketball game, don't get me wrong. But the perspective can be a little bit disorienting. NBA Jam makes it a lot easier to see where your player is on the court. It might not be 3D, but the gameplay is superior, at least in my opinion. Anyway, Konami also had a history of making football titles of varying quality before Soccer Superstars came out. I suspect that they really wanted to go after the European market. This is Konami Hyper Soccer, a 1992 NES game that was released only in Europe. It's bad. This is probably one of the worst football games I've ever played. And part of the problem is that the screen is zoomed in way too far. You can't see anything. In 1993, Konami came out with this arcade game, Premier Soccer. Fortunately, they let us choose how large we wanted the players to be. Anyway, this is kind of a silly arcade game with no offside rule at all. It's sort of a grab the ball and shoot kind of game. And it's really hard to play defense. But this is the general framework that Konami used for its football arcade games, for better or for worse. And honestly, Soccer Superstars is the same game as Premier Soccer, except a lot faster. You've only got about a minute to play. The controls are just about the same, and it's really easy to score goals provided that you pass enough. Now, I'm not going to criticize this arcade game for not being realistic. After all, the point was to create an arcade game. You know, something that can be played quickly and would provide hours of fun. On that front, this game is actually a smashing success. The one thing I can really criticize is the defense. Like run and gun, it's almost impossible to play defense, mostly because it's so hard to figure out which player you're controlling. However, offense is very satisfying and pretty easy for the most part. And it's nice to be able to score goals left and right. I mean, that's the reason we're playing, right? We want to score. Now, if you're interested in this game, you're probably going to have to use an emulator. The chances of you finding a working arcade cabinet of this one are slim to none. According to the Arcade Museum, there are only 11 copies of these machines registered. Of those 11, 10 are actually only circuit boards, which can be stuck into any Konami machine of the time. After all, these games were made to be interchangeable. And so, when you see an eBay auction like this, you might get excited at first, but hold on. What you're buying here is really only the PCB, not the full cabinet. The PCB, of course, would be this baby right here. Now, it was smart of Konami to try to cut down on the price of manufacturing cabinets. I mean, everybody was doing it at the time. It started with Nintendo's Versus system and the PlayChoice 10, it spread to Konami, and this most famously was Neo Geo's strategy. But the problem for collectors is that you're not going to find original systems all that easily. In fact, even finding examples of advertising for this game is quite difficult. I was able to find a few flyers in the end, but not much. The newspapers had a few articles about Superstar Soccer, though these are clearly articles about the Super Nintendo game, which is quite different from the arcade game. That game was released in February 1995 and was a lot more successful than the original arcade game. For the arcade experience, you're really going to have to stick with emulation. Now, if you go the emulation route, you'll need to know a few things to make it playable, assuming that you're playing one player on the PC, that is. I'm using MAME, so I'll show you what I did in MAME. By default, the game plays in two-screen mode. Now, if you hit Tab, you can get to the menu screen. You can then go down to video options and change to the single-screen display. Also, go to the sound options and set the left speaker to central. Then you'll want to mute all the right speaker sounds. That way you won't be looking at two different screens at once. Of course, if you really want, you can play the game this way, as confusing as it might be. But the funny thing is that I haven't seen any cabinet photos of this two-player version. The only cabinet photo that I've seen is this one, and it's clear here that there's only one display. I'm assuming that there was a version of this game that looked like this run-and-gun dual display cabinet, but I haven't found any photographic evidence of this. But you know, it's okay, no big deal. Anyway, I'm not sure just how successful Soccer Superstars was in the arcade. It must have been some sort of hit though, because it spawned a home console game and an arcade sequel. Well, I mentioned this game a second ago. This is International Superstar Soccer on the Super Nintendo. This game has a nice isometric perspective and it's more of a simulation game than an arcade game. The controls are great and the graphics are fantastic. Unfortunately, I'm not very good at this game, but you can still get the general idea. I honestly think that this game is superior to the Super Nintendo FIFA games. In particular, the speed and the smoothness of this game is really refreshing. And I hate to say this, but the graphics look better to me than FM24.
Free kick.
But that's going to change soon with FM26, right? Well, we'll see. Anyway, there was also an arcade sequel to Soccer Superstars, but the sequel wasn't quite that impressive, at least in my opinion. Versus Net Soccer ran on very similar hardware and also comes with that dual screen setup by default on main. The cool thing here is that you can choose a vertical or a horizontal perspective. The vertical perspective, though, is not quite as smooth or as easy as Soccer Superstars. Though the graphics are a little bit better, the gameplay doesn't feel quite as good, not to me at least. Everything feels choppy and things are zoomed in a little bit too far. The horizontal perspective makes it easier to see what you're doing, but depth perception is pretty difficult. Anyway, regardless of the mode that you choose, you will run into this emulation bug about halfway through your game. All of the Konami GX games have video issues on emulators, unfortunately. Anyway, my advice is to simply stick with Soccer Superstars, which I think is a lot more fun anyway. But then comes the biggest question: is this the best arcade football game out there? It's a great game, but it's not quite the football version of NBA Jam. It absolutely is the football version of Run and Gun, however. If you like Run and Gun, you will love Soccer Superstars. It's the same concept. The reason why I hesitate to call Soccer Superstars the best is because of this series, Super Sidekicks on the Neo Geo. This series just might be better than Soccer Superstars, though I have to play it a little bit to give you my full opinion. So we'll take a closer look at this one in a future video. And of course, you can tell me below what you think. Now, I do think that Soccer Superstars was the best of the Konami football arcade games. I don't think that it's quite as good as International Superstar Soccer on the Super Nintendo, but then again, we're talking about a completely different genre of game. I know though that Soccer Superstars is still a ton of fun even 30 years later, so if it's been a while for you, try to get a hold of a copy and give it a try.